The president is losing his grip on things: his party, the war in Iran, the narrative around his health. Republicans in the House have now joined their colleagues in the Senate in trying to end the war, setting the stage for what could be a MAGA revolt ahead of the midterms, possibly his own party sensing Trump is getting weaker across the country, even if he's not within his own party just yet. He's also getting weaker physically too, or at least it seems that way. He disappeared from public view for a full week, only reemerging in a pre-taped podcast and then a rushed, unscheduled Oval Office press conference where he looked and sounded rough as he meandered from topic to topic before lashing out at journalists. But we're going to start today with the fact that the Department of Justice said it was ending the $1.8 billion slush fund, but Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche's fingers were crossed, so only maybe. And like I said on Tuesday, Trump's immunity deal, that's not going anywhere. And because of that, Todd Blanche gets what he's always wanted: the chance to really be Attorney General, meaning we are going to be staring down the barrel of a potential recess appointment, which I'll explain. It's Thursday, June 4th, 2026. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Grant Hermes. So no sooner had the episode on Tuesday hit your feeds than we got the breaking news that Attorney General Todd Blanche, while getting grilled on Capitol Hill during a House committee hearing, said the DOJ would be backing off the entire anti-weaponization slush fund, all $1.776 billion of it. And then, when he was asked if, he meant it, this is what he said to Democratic Representative Grace Meng.
I don't know what the purpose of putting something in writing. I'm telling you what we're doing. Meaning, why do I need to put something in writing if I'm telling you what we're doing?
Well, you started it, you established it in writing, so it just makes sense to rescind it in writing. I think a lot of Americans, both sides of the aisle, are concerned about it, and it would restore a lot of trust about this issue.
Okay, I'm not committing to doing anything in writing.
Not committing. No. Okay.
I'll take it under advisement.
So that's lawyer speak for no, because any lawyer will tell you if it's not in writing, it doesn't mean anything. The fund got dropped or paused or whatever we're calling it because of pushback from Republican senators who essentially said they were going to hold up funding for ICE and parts of DHS if this fund remained in place. Then Trump allies like Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, who is also looking to cash in on this slush fund, suggested that Congress make its own fund and have people applying for payouts make what's called a federal tort claim. Now, those are usually used for when somebody is hurt out of something like negligence by a federal worker on the job. What Graham is talking about would be twisting that into something else. An Assistant Attorney General, Stanley Woodward, the one who's been signing his name to those court filings in the ballroom case that kind of read like Trump wrote them for social media, but then they just copy and pasted them into a court document. Well, he saw that Graham said this, and then he went online and said, "We're on it," meaning the DOJ presumably has something else in the works before later deleting that, so we don't know what the DOJ is up to. But back to Blanche, in that same hearing, he was also asked about whether the DOJ would be rescinding Trump's deal with the IRS that shields him and his businesses from being investigated from past and potentially all future tax crimes. This is how that went with Connecticut Democrat Rosa DeLauro. And full disclosure here, I did cut some of this down for time, for those of you listening and not watching.
No, the only thing you're talking about here, so the blanket immunity is not something that you're going to move back on?
It's not blanket immunity. That's not true.
It is.
No, it's not.
Friends, listen to what is being said here today here. This is really pretty extraordinary, that we are going to forever barred and precluded from examining or prosecuting the president, his sons, and the Trump organization's current tax filings. Simply put, you just gave the president and his family a tax immunity to the tune of about $100 million.
Not true.
Well, yes, you have, my friend.
No, that's not true.
A couple things. First, Todd Blanche is trying really hard to be the opposite of Pam Bondi in these hearings. Sometimes he's good at it, sometimes not. But he's trying not to fly off the handle or show that he's getting rattled because he wants to be Attorney General. And he needs to show senators who would confirm him that he's got the temperament to do that job. Second, nothing has changed with that order. That's what he said. And that order is already an attempt at an end run around Trump outright pardoning himself, which might be illegal under the Constitution. Nobody is really sure because presidents haven't really tried to do it. But by having an attorney general do it, even if Todd Blanche won't say, yes, it's immunity, it is an order that protects Trump and the family businesses and his kids from the DOJ and IRS. And that is a huge, huge deal, even if it doesn't say pardon in big gold letters on the top. Now, like I said on Tuesday, that case is back open in federal court in Florida, but for now, this whatever order, immunity, pardon, whatever you want to call it, is still in place. And that seems to have been enough for Blanche, who has been auditioning to be the real Attorney General for weeks, to become a real boy. Last night at a private event at the Rose Garden, which Trump now calls the Rose Garden Club because everything just has to be like a little bit worse right now for some reason, Trump announced he'd be officially nominating Blanche to be AG.
He's acting Attorney General. Tomorrow I'm instructing Dan and everybody else that's involved in that very complicated process, which is going to go, I think, very quickly, that we are going to make him permanent Attorney General.
The real announcement, like on paper, hasn't come out yet, but Blanche might not have the easiest road ahead for confirmation. There are still real concerns among members of the House and some members of the Senate about Blanche's handling of the Epstein files and more than 3 million pages that have yet to be released, meaning the DOJ is still breaking the law that Congress passed last year. Members of the Senate will have to vote very soon on whether to rein in the president's war powers in Iran, which they've already said yes to doing once. I'll talk about that more in a little bit. They're also likely going to have to contend with the fact that it looks like Trump wants to actually nominate Bill Pulte to be the Director of National Intelligence, not just keep him as the acting DNI. I talked about Pulte on Tuesday, but he has no national intelligence or no national security experience, which by law he has to have extensive experience in. Plus, he already has a job. He's running federal housing, so he would be doing both those things, which seems like a bad idea. It also could end up being one of these things where the White House might try to force senators between choosing Blanche or Pulte or Iran, and they might only get to choose one without risking an angry, vengeful president, or risk this game of chicken. This is where we get to this thing called a recess appointment. These are in the Constitution, and they're really put there because it was hard to get to D.C. for senators in the 1700s, 1800s, and early 1900s. And being in D.C. in the summer kind of stinks. It's hot, it's muggy. For a long time, the U.S. Capitol was literally killing people. I wrote all about this in one of the things you forgot from civics class articles. But now, when a president does a recess appointment, if it's a big position, it's pretty controversial because senators are supposed to advise and consent. They are supposed to be able to vet these people in these big positions. It's a constitutional duty they have. And presidents aren't really necessarily supposed to go around them. And Trump might try to wait out these senators to appoint somebody like Blanche and Pulte in these summer recess positions to just have them in these jobs. I want to talk to you about sleep, because if you've been following this show, you know the news cycle has been absolutely unhinged. And if the news cycle isn't going to be good to you, your sleep cycle should be. And that starts with the right fabric. And it's why this episode is brought to you by Cozy Earth. Here's the thing. Summer is here and it is hot. You're already lying awake at 2 a.m. thinking about the headlines, your deadlines, that weird thing you said at work. The last thing you need is to also be sweating through your sheets like you're having a fever dream. That is where Cozy Earth comes in. Bamboo sheets are legitimately temperature regulating, meaning they keep you cool when it's hot and warm when it's not. I know that sounds like marketing speak, but it is just how bamboo works. It breathes. Your polyester blend from 5 years ago, it does not breathe. It traps heat. It is not your friend. They also have bamboo pajamas, which make you wonder why you ever wore anything else to bed. And when I wake up, I put on their new brushed bamboo joggers that are soft in a way that feels almost unfair to the rest of my clothes. Look, the world is a lot right now, and you deserve one thing, at least, that just works. Cozy Earth is that thing. You can go to CozyEarth.com and use the code MIMS25 at checkout for 30% off. And just a heads up, when you use the code, Make It Make Sense gets a cut of that sale, which helps this show keep going. So you're sleeping better and you're supporting independent journalism, which is, what I call a win-win. Again, the code is MIMS25 at CozyEarth.com. All right, let's get back to the show. Now, speaking of what the president may or may not be thinking, this is probably a good place to switch gears. When I mentioned that Rose Garden event, that was just the second time the president had been seen in public or in a crowd in a week. Since his physical last week, Trump had not been seen in 7 full days. Now, I crunched the numbers on this thing. I went back through his schedule and over some things that I looked at for a recent piece I wrote on the Substack about how one of the hallmarks of Trump's second term is that he's been more isolated than his first. And while this was easily the longest stretch he's been out of the public eye so far, he does tend to disappear at the beginning of the month a lot more. He gets busy in the middle of the month, and then things wind down again at the end of the month. Now, some of that has had to do with where weekends have fallen in the last 17 months and also where presidential travel has been. But also when it comes to travel and government business, a lot of that's in his control. He's the president. And at any rate, no one had seen the president, this president of all of them, in a week. Then videos started popping up of a pre-taped podcast he apparently did with the New York Post, a very friendly Trump outlet, on Tuesday, and he did not look good. His face was swollen and drooping on his right side, which is the side that's been drooping since last fall. His right eye was so swollen that when I first saw it, I thought he had a black eye, like he'd fallen and hit it on a doorknob or something. There were parts of this interview where it looks like he can barely even open it. It's so puffy. His right hand was once again covered in makeup, which isn't new, but it was also very swollen. This wasn't a public event either, and no one in the broader press was able to verify when it actually took place. Now, they were talking about things that seemed timely, so it does appear to put Trump at this taping on Tuesday. I'm not saying there is some kind of grand weekend at Bernie's conspiracy going on here. I know there's a lot of it out there right now. I want to be clear, that is not happening on this show. But still, the president didn't have any public appearances scheduled so far this week until, all of a sudden, he called an impromptu executive order signing / press conference in the Oval Office where he mostly talked about the Lincoln Reflecting Pool project being almost done. He held up this chart saying that the pool is taller than all these famous buildings if it was stood up or they were laid down, which he's done before. And honestly, I don't know what we're supposed to be impressed by when he does this. One of these things is flat. The others are buildings where people go into, and these also are built into the sky. They're three-dimensional. It's not apples to apples unless you're only comparing which number is the biggest, but whatever. In this press conference, Trump was really listless. He was clearly having trouble following questions, and then when he couldn't kind of regain control of what was happening in the press conference, he lashed out. At one point, he attacked CNN's Kaitlin Collins in a really misogynistic way by essentially telling her to smile more.
CNN will believe it because they knew what was going on. They're crooked as hell. CNN's a very corrupt organization, but with a corrupt reporter standing right there. Never smiles. She never smiles. She's a young, beautiful woman, never smiles. I never see a smile off her face. I see her standing there with hatred in her eyes, like she has hatred because we have borders, because we have a strong military.
There was this other really tense part of this proof of life press conference. And that was when the president was asked about what was going on with the war in Iran, specifically about whether or not we're still in a ceasefire. Here's what he said.
This latest attack on Kuwait, is the ceasefire with Iran still on?
Well, there's a reason for everything. And we hit them pretty hard the night before, and actually last night. And when it was explained to me, I said, all right, so we'll do that. But we've been hitting them pretty hard. A little bit. So there is a reason for certain things, and there's usually a reason that sometimes makes sense. But they did something, not a big deal. We got it. We nipped it in the bud very quickly.
Just to make it clear, at no point did he say, yes, the ceasefire is still on. But also, none of that sounds like a ceasefire, especially because the U.S. fired into its 6th civilian merchant ship in the Strait of Hormuz, which is potentially another war crime, and one that Central Command posted like a highlight reel this week. Trump was also asked about how long this thing could last in that New York Post podcast interview, and he said he thinks the blockade could be around until Labor Day.
You think the blockade will still be in place by Labor Day?
I don't know. I mean, I think it could be, but I think it's unlikely. I think that we'll have it. I think this will resolve itself fairly quickly.
And again, really quickly, the Pentagon assessment for when mines could be removed after the blockade is removed is 6 months. And then after that 6 months is when oil and gas prices would start to go back to normal levels. So we are well into next spring at that point if Trump is right about the blockade lasting until the end of the summer. And what Trump said in that podcast and in the Oval Office also didn't sound great to members of Congress, because last night the House voted to approve a war powers resolution to end the war in Iran without congressional approval, in a pretty massive rebuke of the president from a House that is controlled by his party, meaning that Trump would have to go to Congress to justify why troops and ships are in Iran and around Iran, or bring everyone home. 4 Republicans crossed party lines to join every Democrat in this vote. 2 of them, Tom Barrett from Michigan, who put up a war powers resolution before, and Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania, are in close races. Warren Davidson is in a very safe seat in Ohio, but has also tended to rebuke the president on certain issues and is good friends with Thomas Massie, who the president poured a ton of money and time and energy into running a candidate to remove Massie from his seat in the primary race in Kentucky, because Massie led the charge to get the Epstein files released. On Truth Social, Trump was angry, saying yesterday in a meaningless vote, the House voted for bad Republicans and all of the Democrats, which he now spells without a B, to limit my war powers right in the middle of my final negotiations to end the war with the Islamic Republic of Iran. They would rather have our country fail than give me another of many victories. I know this feels quaint now to say, but 10 years ago, could you imagine what would have happened, what we would have thought or felt if Barack Obama, or any president pre-2016 for that matter, had talked about the job of being president in those terms? My victories, my war powers. We had weeks worth of news debates about whether Obama wearing a tan suit or having to turn around to salute a Marine guard while he got off Marine One were behaviors that were beneath the office, whether those were unbecoming. Like I said, I know that seems quaint, but I think every now and then perspective these days is important. Anyway, Trump is half right about this vote in the House. It's not meaningless, far from it. It's just not binding. It still has to go to the Senate, but the Senate has already passed a war powers resolution. They passed theirs back on May 19th before the House skipped town. And that was before there were several more Republicans in the Senate that Trump had personally gotten unelected. So he's got less support there than he had just a few weeks ago. Now, if the Senate does pass this version, what does that mean for enforcing it? I know that's kind of the million-dollar question, and that's a whole other ball of wax. But again, Trump and members of his cabinet are approaching the midterms where Democrats are expected to win the House and maybe the Senate. And that means impeachment hearings. And if he doesn't comply with a War Powers Act vote come January of next year where there's a new Congress, that is just another impeachment investigation and maybe a trial that would bog down his final years as president, especially as his party looks to leave him behind. All right, that is it for today's episode. Please rate and review the show wherever you get your podcast. Like and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, where the brand new article this week for paid subscribers is all about the new rule the U.S. Postal Service is trying to put in place that would make your mailbox the latest battleground for the midterm elections, because they want to track you and your vote. It's part of a broader plan the White House has wanted to put in place for a long time, but this is the first time they've taken real steps to do it. And it's a big deal, even if it doesn't feel like one, because it's with the post office. But that is just for paid subscribers who get access to that for $5 a month. And as always, share the show on social media. It is Mims News Pod. That is all one word on every platform. You can tag me at Grant Hermes on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Grant_Hermes on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Hermes, and I'll talk to you next time.